Welcome to Beyond Cerebral, a community that seeks lasting transformation in individual lives by moving beyond the cerebral to live in the revelation of Jesus Christ. Thanks for tuning in today. If you want to learn more about our community, connect with us by scanning the QR code on your screen.
We are back for the final installment of this series, and we're going to be I'm back here with Pastor John Shantz again, and let's go over our monthly challenge. The Bible is our source and God's written word of love and truth. Again, studies have shown that people who read the Bible regularly have significantly more hope and overall positivity compared to those who don't. So our challenge to you this month is to read the Bible for 15 minutes a day. It can be 15 minutes solid, broken up into 2 sessions, or even into 3 5-minute touch points in one day. So as we wrap up this series on truly living a life transformed for Jesus and pursuing God with all we got, we've got to talk about hypocrisy. Jesus talks about this a bit in his teachings. We're going to start here in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7, verses 1-5, where Jesus says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." Jesus also talks a little later in Matthew again about hypocrisy, and he's addressing the Pharisees, I believe. In Matthew 15, 7-9, he says, "You hypocrites! Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules." Now, I think we get a little confused when we talk about hypocrisy and we approach this word hypocrisy that Jesus uses in his teachings with our modern concept in the English language of hypocrisy. So we think about hypocrisy, and I always approached these verses with this mindset. It was like you tell everybody to live one way and then you live another way.
Confessing being a Christian is a lot more serious than what we allow it. Needing something authentic. And we try to substitute it with religious forms, and it does not do what one time it may have.
Right. And I would even argue that is Jesus's whole point.
Yeah.
It's not so much that he's not really addressing, I don't believe, as I studied into this, somebody who's struggling with sin and seeking to overcome. Because we all have that. We are all human beings. We all have our own journeys. We all have our stories. We all have our areas in life where there are growth points. Right. And so some days we'll have a good day. Some days we'll have a bad day. And that is just the nature of the human experience this side of heaven. Jesus wasn't really talking about that. What he's talking about was what you were talking about, where he was saying, okay, we're addressing these Pharisees especially, and the crowds where they had this form. They had the rules, they had the law, they had the sacrifices, they had the do's, they had the don'ts. And Jesus was talking about hypocrisy to this crowd, and even to the Pharisees, especially to the Pharisees, who had it down. These guys were like the ones that everybody would go to when they had a question of how the law should be applied to their lives. Like, they were the go-to people. They were the supreme authority in their culture. And Jesus called them hypocrites. So it wasn't like these Pharisees lived one way or said one thing and lived another way. That is not what Jesus was addressing. What Jesus was addressing, and the word that he used in the Greek, was a word that they would have been very, very familiar with from the arts and rhetoric. So this word was actually more connected to theater. And was really connected to Greek theater, where you had an actor on stage and they had a really big mask that was like their mark for who their character was.
Oh.
And this word, hypocrites, I believe is how it's pronounced, it was like there was a sense there was an interpreter and an answerer. And it was the interpreter from underneath the mask was the hypocrite. So the answerer in early Greek tragedy, there was like a play that would consist of a large singing chorus, and there was just one single actor. And this was the hypocrites, because his primary job was to dialogue with or to answer the crowd, the chorus leader.
Right.
And then there was an interpreter. So the Greek actors, again, they wore these oversized masks. They were often made of linen or wood, and they would project their voices and depict different emotions. But the term fit the profession. The actor was literally an interpreter speaking from underneath a false face.
Yeah.
So this ancient culture actually did not have a negative flavor like we do nowadays in the English. Because in the English, I think we think of this as so negative, this hypocrite as so negative. But we have to understand in Jesus's day, this word was not necessarily negative at all. It was just, it just meant somebody who had a role
Right.
in a play where they were behind this mask and they were the one interpreting or answering the chorus, the one actor that was answering everybody else. So Jesus applied this to the Pharisees, which, as I already said, they were the ones the rest of the nation would go to interpret the law. How do I apply the law in my life? So in their culture, and this would make sense.
Yeah.
But Jesus was saying, okay, this actually isn't what I'm looking for. He is the one who actually connected more of a negative flavor to this word for them. So because it wasn't like the Pharisees were trying to lie. They were not trying to perform one way and say another thing. They were trying to make it match. The problem was they didn't have a transformed heart. And Jesus was saying it's not about the religious system and applying the law totally correctly, all your 613 different ways. It's about changing your heart because God's after your heart.
We had a situation where we're new Christians, and I was so amazed at the things that were taking place and changing my mind and thinking and all that kind of stuff. And it was Mennonite that time, and they came out of the suit, the dress, and we were spoke at a place, and the guy came up to me afterwards, and I was going to get him. I was so in love with what I was being shared with me that I was willing to go and get a new plain suit. And this guy came up to me afterwards and he said, "Your testimony was very nice, but it would have been much better if it had been in a plain suit." I was so infuriated, and I wasn't a Christian that long, but I couldn't let my old man show up because I was not very good. And I thought, if that's what it takes, if that's what they're looking for, I'll never measure up, because I don't see the transformation of anything in the suit. It's not in there. But if it's, well, Jesus said that about you're looking for what's on the outside. I'm looking for what's on the inside. And there was, even my Bible was criticized. And I thought, what is this? And people said that we're satanic, we're Satan. And I thought, how can that be? My former life, absolutely. But this life, no way. So the confines of that's what happened with Hopewell. The denomination structure, you're supposed to get converts, you're supposed to get all kinds of people, but there was a restriction as to who could come. We would have not been accepted anyplace else other than where we were. And I don't want to push that yet, and very significant, because it certainly changed. It took about 10 years, but all of a sudden the denominational structure was too restrictive of what God was bringing, and they're more concerned about what God was entrusting to us that did not need a denominational flavor. It needed the significance of the Holy Spirit and the Spirit of God being quite capable of doing what he intended to do in the first place. And I could go on for a long time about that stuff, but it's just
I think we both could go on a long time about that stuff. That is not about the
But you also have to be sympathetic about where they are. You can't really condemn people who have been generations in something without a compassion or a passion for them. Who was I? Really? I was a grub worm out of the thing, and I'm going to now tell people what they have to do and what they have to do. No, the Spirit of God has to convict them. But if you fight and hold these tensions against one another, it's almost impossible for anybody to move.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that what Jesus was saying in this passage, it wasn't new. It was actually God's original intent.
Right.
And we see this in Deuteronomy 6:5-6. And this was part of a prayer called the Shema, which God told his people to pray daily, morning and evening. And is the oldest fixed prayer in Jewish culture. And they had to pray this twice a day, or this line came up 2 times in the prayer. So they said this line 4 times a day, and it is found Deuteronomy 6:5-6, and it says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These words I am commanding you today are to be upon your hearts." So as revolutionary as Jesus' teachings were, that, it's not about washing your hands before you touch the text. It's not about washing the cups. It's the inside. It's the inside. It's about the heart.
Yeah.
Because God's intent, yes, he provided some descriptions and prescriptions in the Old Testament.
Yes.
Because they had no idea how. They had no idea how. They came out of a very pagan culture out of Egypt.
Right.
They had no idea who God was. They had no idea what kind of life he wanted them to live. So he gave them guidelines.
Yeah.
He gave them boundaries. But then they got so stuck in the guidelines and boundaries, they missed the whole point, that it was supposed to be an overflow of their passionate love for God. It was always supposed to be connected to the heart, not connected to the rules.
I have I should have brought it. I have a chalice that used to be in the church. And the pastor's wife that was there prior to my going there came up one day and she said she found it in her attic. I don't know why I was at their house, but she gave me this chalice. And it was in a little velvet bag, and it was, and so she handed it to me, and I just took it, and she left. Then I looked at it, and I thought, who in their right mind would keep this piece of trash? I was going to take it to the dump. On the way through the sanctuary, the Lord said, maybe you should look, I can feel this one. Maybe you should look at it again. And he said, what does it remind you of? It was so tarnished and it was broken. And the cup itself wasn't, but the base and all that it would be nothing you'd keep. And I looked at it and he says, what does it remind you of? And he says, doesn't that remind you of you? Weren't you broken? Weren't you tarnished? Weren't you crushed? Weren't you disillusioned? Weren't you whatever, all this stuff? And he said, please look at it again. I did. He said, you realize that the chalice, the bowl, is still able to perform what it was intended to do in spite of all the damage. I still have it. And I use it a lot. And I didn't ever think of it to bring along to it. I have gone through and I am damaged. I've been through all kinds of stuff, self-inflicted, however you want to go about it, not worthy. And here's this cup. And we have used it. When we used to take communion as a kid, it was like get a common cup. You didn't have all these little cups, I don't know of anybody getting sick from taking the common cup. Don't ever remember ever. And so it's like how we view things. And I look at people like that. Please, Lord, please don't let me look and trust my eyesight alone. I have to see what you see, because that's where the difference is. And everybody's worth something. Respect, encouragement, whatever. The worst of people. And you never know what someone's life was like before they got this opportunity to be introduced to the difference.
That's right.
So I can get off on these stories.
Right. And what I love about that is it's like you knew that you didn't have it all together, and you came to God and said,
still that way.
God, I'm yours. And that's really what God is after.
Yeah.
That's really what Jesus was after. And here in this story, he was actually talking to people who thought they had it all together.
Yeah.
They thought they had this in the bag, and he was challenging them. It's deeper than that. It's more than that. It's not just about an external system holding all the sin in check. It's about really living a life of freedom, of wholeness, of restoration, of passionate love for God, and the power of forgiveness. Then rituals is not about rituals that seem holy, but they lack a heart connection, and that leave the person truly devoid of the revelation of holiness within their heart. It's leaving them with a mask.
Yes.
And he said, I don't want you to just be a character on the stage. I want you to be the real deal.
Yeah.
And that's what God is calling us to. I want you to be the real deal. I want you to be that authentic representation of the power of love and forgiveness in your life, the power of somebody who is passionately pursuing, not somebody who has exchanged that vibrant life for something so dead. I mean, religion is just dead. If you get stuck in the rules and you get stuck in the regulations, there is no life in that. It becomes a whole big fight of, well, I want to do this, but I can't because my religion says I can't.
That's right.
It's not about that.
Right.
It says, you know what? I love my God more.
Yeah.
And because of that, because I want him more than this, I'm going to choose that.
Yeah.
So it's authentic, and your heart is truly connected to it. You're not behind the mask saying, oh, this is the way it's supposed to be. This is the way it's supposed to be. So I see this. I've almost come to see this as Jesus challenging the Pharisees, saying, you got the mask part down.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. It is so much more that you're missing the beauty, and you're missing the power, and you're missing what it was really always supposed to be about.
I've had some encounters recently, and there's a denomination that a guy boasts about the size of his denomination. There's over 9 million people in this denomination, and all kind of stuff. And I said, but they don't have Jesus. What? So they're really, really excited. I said, why are you excited? The benefit of all that you've studied, all the stuff you're talking about to me, there is no benefit. None. And I can really go off on these, so I will not. But it's like this false idea and concept of what God is. I would get excited when in the book of Acts, in the first few chapters, fourth chapter maybe, they got beaten and they said that these guys were unworthy, uneducated. That's me. The unworthy, the uneducated. I am not a theologian and have all these. I'm amazed at what guys really come up with, and authenticate from the scripture. But I'm not that guy. I'm just the guy that was so excited about when I made a commitment. I had no idea that was just the beginning, and all the things that will be 50 years as Christians on January of this coming year. And I can't imagine life without Christ, without his forgiveness, without our awareness of where we were and the things we had done out of ignorance, thinking we were superheroes. And then to realize that Christ paid a terrible price, an amazing price. I should use that. an amazing price for every one of us not to be condemned and judged and hell be our destiny. People think you don't have to make a choice. If you don't make a choice, you do. So it's important to get an awareness of what this Christ is all about. Again, I got to quit because it's stories and stories, and they start flooding in.
So I think what we're really talking about is that this is not the same thing as somebody who is broken,
Right.
who is struggling with sin, who's held in bondage with sin.
Yes.
That is not what Jesus is actually talking about here.
Yes.
What he's talking about is you think you have it all together because you're following the script,
Yes.
because you're following the regulations, because you're following the behavior modification program, yet you've missed the whole point of living a life of passionate love for God that brings healing to that brokenness so
Right.
you can live in freedom.
Yeah.
Maybe it looks the same, maybe, but it is not the same.
Well,
it is not the same.
You convince yourself it's different and it isn't, or acceptable.
Right. But what I'm saying is, like, if somebody looks at somebody who's quote unquote living the Christian life and they're, going to church all the time, they're in the Bible studies, they're in the workshops, they're running groups or whatever, but yet there's no heart connection.
Right.
That might look the same as somebody who's passionately pursuing God and doing all the same things, but coming at it from a place of wholeness, freedom, and a passionate love for Christ. It's two totally different things. Even if maybe on the surface, if you're just glancing, it looks the same. So again, he's not talking about I'm stuck in a cycle of hurt and brokenness and is being manifested in sputtering around some sin. He's calling us to live a life of wholeness and freedom. He wants to go in there and heal that, bind that up,
yes.
Bring freedom, restoration, and the revelation of forgiveness so you're not held in bondage to that. But that is not the hypocrisy that Jesus was actually talking about. He was actually talking about people who thought they had it all together
Right.
and yet have missed the whole point of having a life transformed by a real vibrant connection with Father. And I love that we come to walk with people into a new place,
Yeah.
which is actually, I think, what Jesus was talking about in Matthew
Absolutely.
7, all the way back in the beginning. That is not that we can't come alongside somebody as the speck gets removed from their eye, but we've got to deal with our own stuff first. We have to go to the Lord and say, hey, God, where in my heart do I need to be healed? Where do I need to be changed? Because sometimes it creates this filter that we wind up seeing incorrectly into somebody else's life. And maybe there is a speck there, because we all have specks, but it's not the speck you think it is,
Right.
Because you're coming at it with your own filter. So we have to get rid of our filters and see the way that God sees. And I think that's really what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 7, is that we need to come alongside with the Father's view of that person's heart, not our view, not our interpretation, but God's heart and God's view. It's because we all have specks and they do need to get dealt with. And so that we can live in greater measures of wholeness, freedom, and see our lives transformed and help transform the lives of those around us. So as you get ready to continue the conversation in your core groups, why does Jesus use the term plank for our own eye and speck for our fellow human being? What does this mean as we engage with one another and seek to help each other grow in faith and character? How can we get the planks out of our own eyes, and what could some of those be? Now, Jesus' teaching in Matthew 7 is part of the Sermon on the Mount, which is a chiasm centered on the Lord's Prayer. So the next question is, how does today's passage connect to the Lord's Prayer? And is there a reflection back to Matthew 5:13-20? And I said that because this is a chiasm, and this portion in Matthew 7 about judging is the reflection of that part of the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
In the Shema, God asks for a totalizing, undivided love. How does focusing on another person's speck divide our hearts?
Thank you for tuning in today. We pray you were encouraged and inspired. Scan the QR code to connect with our community and continue the conversation in a core group with one of our facilitators. Join options are in person, remote, or virtual. Be blessed.